So thank you very much, Dr. Vela and Dr. Sanchez. It's a great pleasure to be here. Dr. Acosta really spoke truth today, and I'm so pleased to be able to see the data that was released yesterday and shown yesterday, and to actually see things today. So today, I have no disclosures except that I'm employed by the Acgme. I serve in AstraZeneca's Health Advisory Council and Highmark Health's Equitable Health Institute's National Advisory Council. So the Acgme accredits all of graduate medical education right now in terms of the core residency programs and most fellowships, and it does it through its review committees. The board of the Acgme oversees those processes of the organization, is ultimately responsible for coordinating educational issues common to all the review committees. The Acgme, you may not know, is an independent organization, and it is formed by a number of groups that have retained nominating rights to the Acgme board of directors. And with the advent of the single accreditation system that brought in the osteopathic community, you just heard Dr. Kane talk about ACOM. AOA also came in at that time. When they were added, we added additional complements of 4 board members each for those people who were added to the existing board at Acgme. So the reason I'm actually telling you all this is because one of the things that I can't do, as Dr. Acosta pointed out, is tell you what the diversity is, what the LHS plus group numbers are among program directors, among DIOs, among faculty. And in fact, when I brought the issue forward at Acgme when I first came, and it was my 3rd-year anniversary yesterday, the thought was, what is it that we can do to collect this information? And that was 3 years ago. And I was told, well, we're going to get information from the AAMC, and we're going to collaborate and bring that information forward. I said, well, you know, we actually have better access to the faculty. We ask them to provide CVs to look at scholarly activity. Why is it that we just don't ask questions around their demographics and collect the information? Because I think the way that the AAMC gets it is not first person. And in fact, what we need to do is figure out how we can get this information. So that was 3 years ago. We have not been able to move it forward since that point, even though the leadership of Acgme, this Tom Nasca, is all foursquare for it. I think we have to have leadership within our own organization. And this has finally now come to a head at the last Acgme board meeting a couple of weeks ago. And I'll tell you about that in a second. So my focus isn't going to be able to tell you about diversity with respect to faculty, the numbers of LHS plus individuals who are there, because I can't. Having no data, as one of our colleagues, Ron Wyatt, would say, is really an expression of the effort put toward a certain problem. And that's one of the things that I'm going to charge us now to try to fix. So anyway, this is the Acgme member organizations. These are the organizations of the American Medical Association, the AAMC, the AOA, ACOM, the American Board of Medical Specialties, the American Hospital Association, and the Council on Medical Specialty Societies. Now, the next thing you need to know is that there are parallels between the UME-GME process, and I apologize for leaving Coca off of this slide, but it was kind of packed. So the LCME accredits medical schools, and it was founded by an independent organization, it's now an independent organization, but was founded by the collaboration of the American Medical Association, AAMC. What it does is it accredits medical schools. The individual medical schools themselves ensure that the individuals who graduate have been educated and achieve a level of competency that prepares them for graduate medical education. The GME side of this is that the Acgme accredits programs in which the physicians train. They can be affiliated with medical schools or not, but fewer than half actually have medical school affiliation. The American Board of Medical Specialties certifies that the physician who's trained is competent, and then the Federation of State Medical Boards ensures that a licensed physician has received training and maintains the ability for safe practice. So that's the roles that each play in this process. The Acgme board also has a nominating process where each of the nominating organizations has 4 directors that serve on the board, and it reserves that nomination or a slate of nominees presents it to the Acgme board for selection. Once a director is seated, they're not the representative for their nominating organization, but instead act solely as a fiduciary to the Acgme. So each nominating organization presents a slate of at least 2 candidates to the sitting ACGME board for every open seat that's available. And then the board then selects a member from that list of nominees. There are 4 additional at-large director seats that the ACGME board can nominate itself. And there are also public members who are seated to the board, and the process by which they're brought on is unspecified. And what it really has amounted to in the first few rounds of this is that we identify people who come to us and say that they have an interest in looking at graduate medical education and helping out with the board processes. So I would invite you to think about how we can bring the LHS voice to that in terms of the public members initially. But the nomination process is really very interesting because each organization has its own mechanism for advancing nominees to the ACGME Board of Directors. There's an open call for nominations that the AMA does, and I can speak to this because I was a former chair of the Council of Medical Education, the AMA, and this is the process by which I came onto the AMA and to the ACGME as a board member. And then you send an application. One of the advances that we made when I was the chair of the council was we created a form that actually asked the demographic information of the people who were appointing the councils. Now that's applied to all of the AMA positions, appointed positions or nominated positions that we have, so that you actually have to answer the question and so that we can get demographic information about who's going to be our leaders, who's representing us, and then who's not at the table. Typically, the individuals who are advanced through a process like this are active members of the organization, and many are noted medical educators in their disciplines. Now, the reason I point this out is that often when I was trying to seek diversity as the chair of the Council of the American Medical Association, Council of Medical Education, I would have to almost beg and plead for people to join the American Medical Association because the AMA won't advance your application if you are not a member. And that's one of the things that I think that we have to continue to do. It's that we must belong to our organizations like LMSA, like HMS, the Hispanic Medical Association, but we have to also be part of those other larger organizations so that we can advance in those processes in order to drive this, at least the way the system is constructed now. And I'll talk to you about that in a second. It helps if you served on an education council of some type, a committee locally, regionally, or nationally. If you served in administrative educational leadership positions in your institution, and I know that people are here striving to do that, and that you're published and recognized thought leaders in medical education. But I tell you, some pathways are easier than others. So the American Board of Medical Specialties has 24 certifying boards. They only send 4 people forward. So you would have to be a rather senior person that's highly regarded by the whole of the American board groups in order to go forward. And it's tough. The competition is high. CMSS, Council of Medical Specialty Societies, has 47 specialty societies. They only have 4 board members. And so there's competition there. The American Hospital Association has institutional members that encompass almost 5,000 hospitals, healthcare systems, and other providers of care. So coming through that system is also fraught. The AAMC is 172 medical schools and over 400 teaching hospitals and health systems and academic medical centers. Being involved in the leadership role in the group on resident affairs is one way I think that people have looked at it in the past, but there are potentially other ways, but the competition, again, is pretty steep. ACOM has 38 colleges, as you just heard. They have the Assembly of Osteopathic Graduate Medical Educators as well, the AOGME, that I think might be a good pathway to go through in order to receive nominations there. But many of the leaders that we have on our board now are current past presidents of the American Osteopathic Association. And so maybe Dr. Kane can speak to that in the question and answer period. But the easiest pathway that I think is probably the AMA Council on Medical Education. In that one, I think you have the possibility of a smaller number of people that you're competing against, and you're competing against individuals as opposed to against organizations or societies or boards. And I imagine the same thing is true for AOA, that if you come through their processes, you're going up against a smaller group of people, and your chances of being nominated to the board are greater in that way. So there are helpful experiences that you could actually put in your portfolio before you advance to the board, and it's past service on an ACGME volunteer committee. So when the opportunities come forward, one of the ways that you might advance the opportunity for you to go forward to the board later on is to have been a member of a specialty review committee. And those applications are actually advanced through specialty societies and a number of other specialty organizations that send nominees to the ACGME board and for selection for the specialty review committee. Being involved in the milestones committee being involved in advisory committees, such as the ones to our office at the ACGME, and special ACGME task forces as another way in which you might be able to show that you're interested in graduate medical education that will prepare you for being on the ACGME board. And then some of these have formal nominating processes, but others are at the discretion of ACGME staff, recognizing that there's expertise in the GME community. So I cite our at-large board positions as those possible mechanisms to come forward. ACGME needs LHS plus representation on its review committees, all its volunteer committees and task forces, because there aren't very many people. This is a photograph of the last time the ACGME board assembled, and that was 2 years ago. So the faces are a little bit different. But what you'll see is, as David Acosta pointed out, is that the number of Latinx individuals is not discernible. And I'll tell you, though, that in the new board, as it's configured, that there is a new ACGME board member, David Lopez, who is the chief operating officer for the Parkland Hospital System, who's nominated by the American Hospital Association, and he's the only sitting LHS Plus individual on the current ACGME board. That's a problem. When I was a member of the ACGME board, I was the only African-American physician on the ACGME board. We've gotten a little bit better now with African-Americans at this point, but we still have more work to do in order to build the LHS Plus community and its representation on the ACGME board. So our bylaws are that each member organization may nominate persons to serve as directors in the manner it chooses. As we said before, you can't be a current review committee member, and you can't be an employee or any of the member groups or any review committee appointing organizations. So that covers a lot of waterfront, but that's a small segment of people who aren't eligible. Everybody else is. Our board size is huge, between 38 and 41 individuals, and it's determined by the board annually whether it's going to be somewhere in that range. Additions beyond that require a bylaws amendment, and that's something that we're going to think about. So with 7-member organization, that's 28 directors. There are 1 to 4 directors that can be appointed as at-large members, and that happens by the ACGME board. There are public directors. There's 3 of them. One of them is the Council on Public Members chair, and then 2 other public members. There's a CRCC, the Council on Review Committee chairs, has its own chair, and that person sits on the ACGME board. The Council of Public Members has a director. That person sits on the ACGME board. And now there are 3 resident physicians. The chair of the CRCR, which is the Council on Review Committee residents, because there's a resident on each of the review committees. And then from the American Medical Association resident and fellow section, there is a resident who's chosen. And then from AOA, there's a resident who's chosen. But the board really made a profound statement at its last meeting, in that we are now going to convene a task force on ACGME diversity. How do we build diversity at ACGME on its board and its volunteer committees? Because we think it's extraordinarily important to have voices in the room. My colleague Sunny Nikai would say that the opposite of inclusion isn't exclusion. The opposite of inclusion is really the inability to have everyone's voice heard. It's really the idea that you can't be there. Sorry, if you're not there, then you cannot be heard from, and your input won't be there to be heard by others. So this task force was appointed at our last meeting last month. It's been charged with determining mechanisms to increase the diversity in the ACGME board. We'll hold some organizational meetings with the task force itself, and then we'll host a stakeholder congress at ACGME on May 17th and 18th this year. The board is going to be the target of increasing diversity at the initial phase of the work of the task force, but we're also interested in how do we increase the ACGME volunteer committee diversity as well. ACGME will then hear its recommendations at the September 22nd meeting, and we'll actually show you the leaders of that. Natasha Bray, who is an osteopathic physician at Cherokee Nation from the Oklahoma State University. Betty Chang, who's at the University of New Mexico, is the other co-chair, and I'm going to be the vice chair of that. We need to have LHS Plus representation. The expertise you bring as leaders in medical education is essential. The highlights you bring to understanding particular experiences for learners and faculty cannot be replaced. Consideration of how graduate medical education impacts LHS communities and how that in turn improves the health, eliminates health care inequities, and enhances opportunities is important. And then we need you there as an advocate, as a voice for change within ACGME. I would put in a shameless plug that ACGME staff plays an important role in leadership as well. And we have an essential leadership position as the Vice President of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion that's now being searched for us with the Exeter Group, and their website is there. If you go to their job seekers link, if you're interested in the position at ACGME as Vice President for Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, formerly occupied by Dr. Bonnie Mason, please apply. I would love to have someone from the LHS Plus community in that position. We also have a director for DEI policy and research, a position that was once held by Imam Zarali, whose data you saw earlier today on David Acosta's work. You can apply on LinkedIn for that. We're hiring a research analyst and an executive assistant in our group. And if you know people who are looking for those sorts of opportunities here in Chicago, please let us know. We need LHS Plus representation within the organization as field staff, and because we are charged with investigating program violations. And people who have a perspective of what an LHS individual might be going through in a residency program who complains about treatment or mistreatment is something that we really need to have a voice for, because we often look outside our normal group of field directors in order to do this. And finally, check our website for all ACGME opportunities. So thank you very much. And if there's still some time for questions, then please allow us to do so.
There we go. Thank you so much, Dr. McDade. That was truly a stirring presentation and very concrete in the mechanisms that we can use to move forward to increase LHS representation at the ACGME. Dr. Kane and Dr. Acosta, I'm going to ask you to be seated here where you have access to a microphone. Actually, if you take that with you, Dr. Acosta. This is no joke, guys. There is a real sense of urgency here. We need, according to the AAMC and report it just put out, an incremental 47,000 full-time equivalent physicians to care for our growing and aging LHS populations. So what are we going to do about it? Very pointedly, I'd like to start with Dr. McDade and then Dr. Acosta and Dr. Kane. What are we going to do about this real physician shortage and lack of representation at the highest levels of leadership? So Dr. McDade, if you don't mind us starting with you, what do we need to do? What is the lever for increasing representation at the ACGME level?
Well, I think it starts with the board, and that's why I'm so pleased that this task force is going to be charged with actually going directly at that question. One of the things that I think is essential in trying to drive this is either we try to get the existing nominating organizations to appoint more diversity through its nominees, but that's not been something that's been so successful in the past, or we have to come up with a separate mechanism, a different way of doing it. One of the suggestions is that we actually open up the board membership to a few organizations that represent diverse physicians who might, in fact, increase the size of the board. But we might also think about ways in which we can actually have them become an active voice that's not being heard at the GME level at this point through the ACGME. There's even the talk about maybe we can collaborate with a few of those organizations and try to create new board member positions that are just designed for those individuals who can then nominate to the ACGME board as a nominating organization. So those are a few of the ideas that we put forward. One of the things that I'd like to see this task force do is to get stakeholder input from all those member organizations and find out what they're going to say about what they'll do to increase diversity in their processes that they're not achieving right now. And then through stimulating them to do that, my hope is that they will then figure out how to bring those diverse voices into their organization for other purposes than to just appoint to our board. Because the way that you ascend to leadership in organizations, and I'll speak from my own experience as serving as a board member for the American Medical Association, was that I came through a pathway of medical education, eventually being chair of a council, and then running from the floor of the House of Delegates as a council chair to be seated to the ACGME board. I think that's an avenue for the leadership of the organization itself to actually then be more diverse, and trying to improve the processes to figure out how we can appoint more diverse individuals to the Acgme board.
Thank you, Dr. McDade. That was an incredible response. It's also incumbent on me to congratulate you on your 3rd-year anniversary, and also say that it speaks volumes that you are the inaugural officer for the Acgme, that you have started with very little data to work with, and that you are already generating opportunities for other people. So I thank you for that. Dr. Acosta.
Bill, happy 3rd-year anniversary. It's good to see you. No, I think I would follow in the steps that what Bill just outlined for you. I think we got to get to the space of leveraging the right people, right? So that our voices are heard. And so what really resonated with me is this notion of get the people who make decisions involved, and they need to, and connect them with the people that ultimately are doing the work on, again, our aging population groups as well. And I'll just give you some examples of that. So I think the AAMC board, the Council of Deans, the Council of Teaching Hospitals, and the Council of Faculty and Academic Societies are 4 big bodies that influence what the AAMC does. And that's where you need to aim. You need to aim high. I think that's a really important piece of it. And even if I disaggregate that down a little bit, the AAMC has just expanded its board recently, and we've added an additional 2 seats for community members at large. We've always had 1 community member at large to advocate for our patients and stuff, but we're going to expand that because one's not enough, sort of thing. And those are the people that I think that you can leverage David Acosta to connect with, to get, number one, that conscious awareness. We're having a problem. We have a shortage of who's going to be taking care of our elderly population in the future. And I think that's really critical. We have a crisis, especially with our Latinx communities that are really critical, because it's probably not on their radar, right? And so I would also leverage leadership. And the 2 that come to my mind is Marie Bernard, who is our new, essentially equivalent of myself and Bill, who's serving at the NIH, and she leads up the scientific workforce diversity group there. And essentially, remember, she is a geriatrician. She is a researcher as well. And so she's another one that can also leverage the NIH and being involved along with the rest of us in moving this forward to bring this, bring it to the front burner instead of the back burner where it always tends to lie, sort of thing. And then last but not least, I've got to mention Eliseo, Perez Table as well, leading the work. And because he wants to also tie in with all the multicultural organizations to how can we at NIH begin helping you focus on the health disparities and inequities that are going on. So this is all, when you line these people up, influential leaders that really basically expand the voice that we have. And so that's what I would do.
Thank you, Dr. Acosta. If you would allow me to follow up on that. Over the last couple of years, I've interviewed over 200 students applying not only for medical school, but for residency programs. And the question I asked all of them was, what has the pandemic meant for you? In speaking to white students, I heard back, you know what, as awful as it was an opportunity for me to go home, spend additional time with my family, and reconnect. What I heard from our Hispanic, Black, and Native American students was that it was truly a disaster for themselves and for their families. They lost loved ones. They lost economic stability within their families and often had to retreat from the pathway to take care of business at home. What specifically is the AAMC, and Dr. Kane, you can answer this as well, doing for those students? What are we going to do to make sure we don't have an additional shortfall due to the pandemic itself?
No, I think it is a great question. I think it's a great recognition that I think our academic affairs office, especially the student affairs office within academic affairs, has been addressing and putting a lot of emphasis on wellness and mental health support for our students, because I think we've recognized that. We've seen it, we've heard it as well from all of our constituents and members as well, that This is something that is even more exacerbated than it's ever done.
Mhm.
Even going into this, when you looked at the data with regards to mistreatment, harassment, and how that has led to a rise in mental health disorders in our learners and our residents as well, and our faculty, the reality is that we've been very sensitized to it. Even our pipeline program of SHPP is now starting to address that. And there's some work that's being led by Jeff Young in making connections with certain foundations that specifically are reaching out to students and been very successful as creating this framework. And how can you help? And how can you help students that are suffering in this way, especially from the pandemic? And how does the work done in UME along mental health, how can that transcend into higher education, such as our health professions as well? So I think there's a lot of interest in this. It's really a hot topic right now. It's not going unnoticed, and there are things that are going on behind the doors that I think basically will come to fruition and be able to help it, because again, it's really critical.
So I will start with the first question and then move to the second. So as I was listening to the other two responses, I was thinking about the quote, and I'll probably get it wrong, about when is the best time to plant a tree, today or 20 years ago, I think is the response. And in thinking that way, we obviously start the answer with looking at leadership, right? They're going to influence what happens. But I would take you back to that spiraling staircase that I actually was thinking through, which is at the top of that staircase is the leadership in many positions. So our board has the opportunity to, as it has done, actually make that consensus statement real, so that it's not just signatures for all 58 campuses, but that they really do move this forward, which I'm convinced they are committed to doing. So that will allow us to put the right programs in place. Why are we able to start changing our structure? Why am I adding an executive advisor? In order to move these things forward out of that commitment. So I think that is important. To continue the board development of that entire group, not just a one-time event around the welcoming environment, but what does a plan look like for further development? And then as you work backwards, our Council of Diversity and Equity focused on faculty development programs, leadership development programs that should be able to move us forward. Push all the way to the entry way in terms of the stair, the pathway programs, the other things I mentioned that are intended to bring in a workforce that can meet the needs of America. So I think trying to hit immediately and beginning to work with the board of things they can do more quickly, and then looking at that long-term plan to actually create change overall. For the second question, without having time to get into the entire grant, the real focus I mentioned during the presentation is addressing well-being in underrepresented groups in those rural and underserved areas. Now, your question's a little different, but I think the same type of effort to work with the students, because this isn't just about resilience, right? You can't just make the canary better. We actually have to try to work to change conditions. And so I hope in that space, there's opportunity for us to learn more about student needs, and along the way through the entire development process, create responses, which hopefully if this repeated itself, the outcome would be better, right? But work to be done.
Great. Thank you, Dr. King. Dr. Sanchez.
I just want to just take 5 minutes, and then I'm going to pass it over to Dr. Moreno Walton. But outstanding presentations. Thank you. This is exactly what I was hoping for. One, to have you all come present, Dr. McCabe, Dr. King, and Dr. Acosta, but really to show how we can ensure greater LHS plus inclusion. I think one of the things that I just want to highlight is that currently LMSA has 140 chapters at your medical schools, at your osteopathic and allopathic medical schools. And I will not be content until there's an LMSA chapter at every allopathic and osteopathic medical school. And I think it's completely possible with your help and support. And that the LMSA chapters not only represent our pre-med and medical students, which it has historically, but working with Acgme, extend the personal, professional, and academic development to our residents and fellows, to be really sincere about creating a fabric of support from pre-med all the way up to faculty. The other thing I just want to highlight, and many of you know, is that The chapters over the past 50 years have always had advisors. Advisors always were there, were rarely visible. Their work was viewed as taxation, not only by the individuals, but the institutions were fine with not recognizing that they were committing their time and effort to support our students in a way that institutions weren't able to. And so as we move from taxation to capital, it's really getting your help and helping our faculty finally realizing the skills that they've developed for promotion potential. And I think that's in part why we're here today. I really appreciated what Dr. McDade was talking about in terms of opening the door, inviting LHS Plus faculty, everyone in this room, to apply for leadership positions within Acgme. So what we can do as FPAC, we have over 330 skilled, talented advisors that have been serving our students, our residents, fellows, and faculty. We have their CVs. We can work to have a committee to review their CVs and then nominate them to each of your leadership positions, right? In AAMC, ACOM, and Acgme. But what we need is for you to continue to tell us the application deadlines, just like you do when we're applying to medical school residency. By when do we have to put forth our faculty advisors to apply for your positions? And we know that networking matters, right? In my existence in 3 institutions, a lot of it is we're opening up a dean's position. Who do we want to serve in that dean's role? What are you looking for? Similarly, I'm going to ask that you reach out to us and tell us, what skill set are you looking for? What perspectives are you looking for? And then we can put forth a slate and work with you to nominate 10, 15, 20 LHS Plus individuals. The only other thing I'll mention is that I'm really going to ask for you to bring back to your boards, what does it mean to be explicit in inviting LHS Plus individuals to help support your organizations? There's one thing to say we want to invite minoritized individuals to be a part of your leadership team. There's another thing to say we want UIM individuals. But I think what we're calling for, as now we represent the largest non-white racial ethnic group in this country, is for you to specifically say, we want more LHS Plus individuals. And in reviewing strategic plans, that statement is not explicitly being stated. Other groups are explicitly being stated. I've benefited from MinFAC. I truly have. But AAMC explicitly has programs for women. And women had to champion their cause and demand that those programs exist. I think we could do something comparable. We're going to collaborate because we do want leaders to represent that in partnership and in collaboration with AAMC and AACOM and Acgme. But I'm not sure if we've committed to the explicit inclusion of the LHS Plus. So I just wanted to share that and hand it over to my esteemed colleague, Dr. Moreno Walton.
Dr. Sanchez, I am going to say what you said already, but in a slightly different way. I think your point is so extremely well taken. We know that we have, based on a study that was done at Penn State in 2020, we have a deficit of 60-something% of Latinx physicians in this country. And yet, we head up all these organizations, we are leaders in these organizations, and we lose sight of the fact that there's a student and a resident at the core of everything that we do. I still work with students and residents. 25% of my work is clinical. And I am constantly confronted with students and residents who are coming to me because they are having trouble. They're having trouble in medical school. They're having trouble with professionalism as residents. You know, I'm constantly getting calls from program directors about, you know, the problems that the residents are having. Our residents and students are being, and Dr. Acosta, you spoke to this a little bit, they are being asked to adapt a culture that is not their own. They are being asked to give up a culture that is their own. They are being penalized for being who they are and working in a style of tribalism, collaboration that is native to the way that we grow up. and they are being judged by individuals who have tremendous amount of unconscious bias and deny it, and deny that they have that unconscious bias. So even I, as a faculty member who's mentoring students who are in trouble, I'm having to deal with faculty members who are telling me that they don't have unconscious bias, that they treat this, I treat students and residents all the same. So it behooves us, not just us, to make sure that we are getting onto positions of power in the organizations like the AAMC and the Acgme that control the environments where the students are learning and being trained. But it is your responsibility to deliberately and strategically reach out and make a point of saying, this is what I am seeking and this is what I want. When I became president of the American Academy of Emergency Medicine, I was the only woman and the only underrepresented minority in the room. I sat at the table of other board members and they were all white men. Today, my board is 60% women and underrepresented minorities because I strategically, and deliberately chose people, identified people, went to them and said, I want you on my board. And when they told me, I can't do it, I'm not ready, I don't have the leadership skills, I told them, I'm going to mentor you over the next year or two, and you are going to run for my board. We as leaders have to, it's bi-directional, as Dr. Sanchez said. We as the rank and file educators have got to nominate people and push people forward. But I'm asking also you as the leaders in the AAMC, the Acgme, the ACOM, to say that you have a strategic plan to take some of us, mentor us, make us ready to be on your boards and nominate us and put us out there, because that's how the environment is going to change for our students and residents in their training. And that's how they are going to emerge without moral injury. And that's how they are going to emerge strong and able to take care of our community. Yeah. So
I could not have said that any better. I thank you for bearing witness to the trauma of so many LHS individuals coming up through this system. And I also ask for our three speakers to state unequivocally that you will be intentional in moving us forward and recognizing us and in being inclusive and promoting leadership within our LHS community. Do we have time?
So I have to apologize. We have our next session right now that's running a little bit behind with the deans. If you all can stay with us, we would love for this continued discussion, as well as we're going to go right into the lunch and make it a part of a lunch meeting. So help me in thanking again, Dr. Vela, excellent facilitation. 5 minutes, and we're going to go right into the dean session. Thank you, Donald, for keeping us on track.
Thank you.
Thank you.